At 9:39 a.m., a man sent a message asking for help moving something heavy. By the time that message was read, an entire family was already dead. Inside a quiet Santa Barbara home, a respected doctor lay in his bed, shot while he slept. Across the hall, a mother and her 5-year-old daughter had been executed together. The bodies were not left where they fell. They were wrapped, bound, cleaned, hidden, and the person responsible didn't rush. He washed blood from the floors, stripped the beds, started a washing machine, and then calmly walked away, believing he still had hours before anyone would notice 3 people had vanished. This wasn't rage. This wasn't chaos. This was patience. And patience in a murder is terrifying. Dr. Weidong Henry built his life on healing. Born into a family of physicians in China, he carried medicine in his blood long before he ever carried a license. When he immigrated to the United States, he brought with him not just knowledge, but belief that the body could heal when treated with care, balance, and trust. In Santa Barbara, he became a fixture. His clinic didn't feel clinical. It felt calm. Patients described it as peaceful, almost spiritual. People came to him when they were out of options. And often, they left believing again. Henry wasn't flashy. He wore shorts and flip-flops. He laughed easily. He listened. That alone made him different. In an industry filled with egos, Henry's greatest currency was sincerity. He remembered names. He followed up. He treated desperation like something sacred. Over time, his practice flourished, but wealth was never what defined him. What defined him was faith. Faith in people, faith in goodness, faith that if you helped others, the world would eventually return that kindness. In 2009, Henry met Huijie Yu. Everyone called her Jenny. She was younger, sharp, warm, and deeply devoted. Where Henry was gentle and trusting, Jenny was observant and practical. Together, they balanced each other. When they married, friends noticed a shift in Henry. He smiled more. He seemed grounded. And when their daughter Emily was born, that joy became complete. Emily was everywhere, at the clinic with her crayons and tiny table, at meetings with her parents. In photos Henry proudly showed anyone who would look. She was 5 years old in March 2016. Her birthday was 3 days away. From the outside, their life looked almost unreal. A healer, a devoted wife, a bright child, a beautiful home in Santa Barbara County. But even lives that appear peaceful can hide fractures. Not in the family, but around it. In early 2016, Henry began exploring a new venture. Cannabidiol, CBD, was still emerging, and Henry believed in its potential. He wanted to do it right. Scientifically. Ethically. He wanted someone young, technically skilled, ambitious. That was when Pierre Haobsh entered the picture. Pierre was 25. He spoke confidently. He talked about chemistry, energy, innovation. He claimed experience. He claimed brilliance. He claimed a future that sounded almost too extraordinary to question. Some people did question it. Business partners Mark and Marla Palumbo felt uneasy almost immediately. There was something about Pierre that didn't sit right. He talked big. He explained things in circles. He charged expenses that didn't make sense. When confronted, he always had an explanation. But Henry, true to his nature, believed in second chances. He believed in stories of hardship. He believed that helping people rise could change them. Pierre learned that about Henry quickly. By March 2016, tensions were quietly building. Pierre had been caught misusing funds. There were concerns about unsafe lab practices. At one point, Henry decided to cut ties. But Pierre didn't disappear. Instead, he returned with a story, one designed perfectly for Henry. He claimed illness, claimed cancer, claimed desperation, claimed that he only needed one more chance. Henry listened. Jenny worried. She confided in friends just days before the murders. Something didn't feel right. But Pierre had already been welcomed back. On March 20th, Pierre arrived at the Han home as an overnight guest. He stayed 2 nights. He slept in the house. He ate with them. He had access to their routines, their devices, their trust. During that time, investigators would later discover he installed spyware on Henry's computer. Every keystroke, every password, every account. He wasn't just visiting. He was preparing. On March 22nd, Pierre and Henry signed a business contract in the master bedroom. It wasn't notarized. It wasn't witnessed. It read like something rushed. That night, Pierre left. Or so it seemed. Sometime before dawn on March 23rd, Pierre returned. Prosecutors would later argue it was around 4 a.m. Henry was asleep in his bed when he was shot. Across the hall, Jennie was sleeping beside Emily, likely after reading her a story. 8 bullets would later be found in Emily's small body. The killer didn't stop after the first shot. He made sure. After the murders, he didn't flee. He cleaned. He poured bleach. He stripped sheets. He loaded the washing machine. He wrapped the bodies in plastic and duct tape, materials he had purchased days earlier. He dragged them to the garage. He positioned them carefully. He believed he would come back with a truck to move them. He believed he still had time. At 10 a.m., Henry was supposed to attend a meeting with his investment group. He never missed meetings. If he was late, he called. That morning, he didn't. Calls went to voicemail. Concern grew. Excuses were made. Maybe they took Emily somewhere early for her birthday. Maybe they needed a break. But the silence felt wrong. By midday, worry turned to dread. Don Goldberg, Henry's longtime friend, someone who knew his habits, his character, drove to the house. From the outside, everything looked normal. The door was unlocked. The cars were in the garage. Nothing appeared disturbed. But no one answered. Don called 911. Deputies arrived around 5:30 p.m. They entered the home. No response. As they searched, something led them to the garage. When the door lifted, they saw 3 shapes wrapped in plastic and duct tape. Within moments, it became clear who they were. Henry, Jennie, Emily, an entire family erased. The scene told a story. The murders had happened upstairs. Blood evidence was everywhere. Bleach stains suggested a cleanup. Bedding was missing from the beds. In the laundry room, the washing machine alarm had gone off, unbalanced. Inside were blood-soaked sheets. Bullet casings were found. A .22 caliber round lodged between a baseboard and Emily's bed. This wasn't sloppy. It was methodical. Investigators knew immediately this was someone close. Someone with time. Someone with intention. This was not random. This was personal. Within hours, detectives discovered packaging for plastic wrap and duct tape in the kitchen trash. The wrap was a Home Depot brand. Security footage from an Oceanside Home Depot showed a man purchasing large rolls of plastic and duct tape days earlier. The man was Pierre Haobsh. The Hans phones were missing, but digital footprints remained. One phone went dark. The other kept moving south, further and further away, leading investigators directly toward Oceanside. A manhunt began. In the early hours of March 25th, Pierre was spotted meeting his father in a Walmart parking lot. Duffel bags were transferred. A plan was unfolding. Minutes later, police moved in. Pierre was arrested at an Arco gas station. A loaded handgun lay in plain view. His passport was with him. He was ready to disappear. Within 48 hours of the murders, investigators had their suspect in custody. Pierre waived his Miranda rights. He talked. And what he said stunned even seasoned detectives. He claimed he was being hunted, that shadowy forces were after him, that he had invented a revolutionary energy device, that government agencies wanted it suppressed. He insisted he was being framed, that someone else had killed the Han family to get to him. But then detectives received a call. A marijuana grower named T.J. Derrida told them Pierre had contacted him the morning of the murders, asked for help moving something heavy. T.J. agreed to meet him. When Pierre arrived, the first words out of his mouth were chilling. "Just so you know," he said, "I'm a monster." He confessed. He said he had killed Henry, Jennie, and Emily. He described the bodies, the wrapping, the weight, details only the killer could know. He told TJ he planned to drain $20 million from Henry's accounts. He asked for help. TJ played along long enough to get him out of the house. Then the messages kept coming. Desperate, pressuring, suggesting a sudden trip to Las Vegas. Pierre didn't know law enforcement was already closing in. When investigators searched his car, they found everything. Henry's wallet, credit cards, social security number, the phones wrapped in aluminum foil, the murder weapon, a suppressor, ammunition, receipts, digital searches. Everything pointed in one direction. Autopsies would later reveal the brutality in numbers. 14 shots total. 3 into Henry, 3 into Jennie, 8 into Emily. The case would go on for years. There would be claims of conspiracies, of planted evidence, of delusion masquerading as genius. But the foundation had already been laid in those quiet hours before dawn, when trust was exploited, when patience became a weapon, and when a man believed he could erase a family and still walk away. And as the evidence mounted, as the fantasy unraveled, one truth became impossible to escape. This wasn't just murder. It was a betrayal so complete that it weaponized kindness itself. And the deeper investigators went into Pierre Haobsh's mind, the more unsettling the picture became. Because what they were uncovering wasn't just a killer, but a man who believed his own lies, and would do anything to protect them. And that belief would soon collide with reality in a courtroom where stories would no longer be enough. The arrest was only the beginning. Once Pierre Haobsh was in custody, the investigation expanded rapidly. Every detail of the Han family's final hours was scrutinized. Every digital footprint, every purchase, every message. The picture that emerged was one of meticulous planning, cold calculation, and horrifying deception. Authorities learned that for weeks prior to the murders, Pierre had cultivated Henry's trust. He had ingratiated himself into the household, learned routines, mapped out the family's vulnerabilities. What law enforcement found chilling was that the murders were not a spontaneous act of anger. They were an execution-style plan executed with the patience of a strategist and the precision of a surgeon. Investigators traced Pierre's movements with nearly minute-by-minute accuracy. Security footage from retail stores showed him purchasing duct tape, plastic wrap, firearms, ammunition, and bleach. His laptop and phones revealed searches for methods of killing. Questions like most penetrable part of the skull and what ammunition is best for quiet kills. These were not impulsive queries. They were research conducted in the very house where his victims slept, evidence that he had already calculated the exact steps he would take. Even the police were disturbed by the methodical nature of the planning. Wrapping bodies in industrial-grade plastic, using bleach to remove traces of blood, attempting to mask digital footprints. Every step was designed to delay discovery and evade suspicion. It was meticulous. It was cold. And it was terrifying. Public reaction to the murders was immediate and visceral. The Han family had been beloved in Santa Barbara. Henry as a healer, Jennie as a devoted mother and clinic partner, Emily as a bright, playful child. People were stunned that someone could infiltrate a family so completely and commit such brutality. Speculation ran rampant online. Forums, Reddit threads, and comment sections on news outlets exploded with theories. Some insisted it was a robbery gone wrong. Others suggested a business dispute turned deadly. But as details emerged about Pierre's prior deception, the manipulation of Henry's trust, and the careful orchestration of the murders, the reality became more disturbing than any speculation. This was a premeditated, calculated attempt to erase a family for financial gain. Yet alongside public fascination, there was the human side. Friends and associates described the Hans in reverent tones. Don Goldberg, who had known Henry for over 25 years, spoke of him as a brother. Mark and Marla Palumbo recalled dinner games with Emily, joking around in the clinic with crayons scattered across the floor. The normalcy of their lives only amplified the horror of their deaths. People kept returning to the question, how could someone so seemingly innocent, so young, capable of charm and deception, commit such an atrocity without remorse? Psychologists who analyzed Pierre painted a picture both disturbing and eerily consistent with what investigators had uncovered. Pierre was described as a pathological manipulator. His charm was deliberate, his empathy performative. He lived in a fantasy world of his own making, one where he was always the victim, always under threat, always a misunderstood genius. In interviews, he claimed shadowy government agencies were out to get him, that his energy invention was being suppressed, that others had killed the Hans to frame him. To the trained eye, these were hallmarks of a narcissistic personality with psychopathic tendencies, someone able to fabricate complex narratives to justify actions that were morally and legally indefensible. The psychological portrait matched the evidence. Pierre's actions, installing spyware, planning the murders in advance, attempting to steal millions, demonstrated a complete lack of empathy. Even when confronted, he never admitted wrongdoing. He constructed elaborate stories to deflect responsibility. And yet, within those stories, there were glimpses of his obsession with control, of his need to dominate outcomes. This wasn't just greed. It was the manipulation of life itself, an attempt to assert total power over a family he had once feigned closeness with. Medical examiners provided grim confirmation of the violence. Autopsies showed Henry, Jennie, and Emily had been shot multiple times. Henry and Jennie each received 3 bullets. Emily was struck 8 times. The precision, the selection of a .22 caliber pistol with a suppressor, and the choice to shoot while the victims slept all underscored the deliberate nature of the act. There was no struggle in the bedrooms, no sign of self-defense, and the placement of the bodies in the garage indicated premeditation, not only in killing, but in handling the aftermath. The brutality was deliberate. The execution, almost clinical. Investigators also noted financial motives. Pierre had attempted to access Henry's accounts immediately following the murders. Fraud alerts were triggered on transactions exceeding tens of thousands of dollars. The plan had been to siphon millions. But his timing was off, his haste exposed by the very systems he had hoped to manipulate. Every step he took after the murders revealed the intersection of greed, arrogance, and desperation. It was audacious and almost unbelievably reckless, given the meticulous planning beforehand. The trial was set to begin years later, delayed by motions, evidence analysis, and the extraordinary complexity of the case. Public attention remained high. People wanted answers not just about what happened, but about why someone could commit such a calculated act. Media coverage highlighted Pierre's history of deceit, his online fabrications about wealth and achievements, and his repeated manipulations of associates and friends. The prosecution painted a clear narrative. Pierre Haobsh was a man who lived in his own constructed reality, capable of incredible charm, but with a ruthless disregard for human life when it served his ambitions. Defense attorneys tried multiple angles, emphasizing inconsistencies in timelines and arguing that Pierre's grandiose stories might have obscured the truth. GPS data, phone records, and witness testimony were contested. The defense suggested that Pierre could not have committed the murders alone, positing conspiracies and alternate explanations. Yet, despite these efforts, the evidence of premeditation, purchase records, security footage, spyware installations, and direct confessions was overwhelming. The jury was presented with a man whose life was a blend of fact and fiction, but whose actions on March 23, 2016, were undeniably real and devastatingly final. During cross-examinations, the courtroom was gripped by a chilling realization. Pierre had remained calm, often deflecting questions with bizarre claims of government persecution or pseudoscientific inventions. The contrast between his composed demeanor and the horrific details of his crimes left observers unsettled. Experts testified on the manipulation of trust, the psychology of predatory behavior, and the mechanisms of narcissistic pathology. Every testimony reinforced the image of a man whose ability to simulate normalcy had been weaponized, and whose plans had been executed with horrifying efficiency. Prosecutors introduced witnesses like T.J. Derrida, who detailed Pierre's confession on the day of the murders. He described the exact method of execution, the wrapping, the transportation attempts, and even the intent to flee. TJ's testimony was corroborated by forensic evidence, digital footprints, and the physical remnants of Pierre's purchases. The narrative was clear. The crime was meticulously planned, morally bankrupt, and financially motivated. The family's trust had been exploited to lethal effect. Outside the courtroom, public fascination remained intense. Forums debated the motives, the psychology, and the details of Pierre's past deceptions. Some focused on his supposed genius in energy technology. Others on the audacity of his attempts to manipulate those around him. For many, the most unsettling aspect was the betrayal of trust. The idea that someone could infiltrate a family's life so completely, feign friendship, and then commit unspeakable acts. The story became a cautionary tale, shared repeatedly online, a testament to the fragility of trust and the darkness some individuals are capable of harboring. In the months of pretrial proceedings, evidence continued to mount. Investigators revealed that Pierre had used a keylogger to monitor Henry's digital activity. He had watched passwords, financial accounts, and personal communications. Every step of his plan had been informed by the intelligence he collected. The prosecution argued that this was no ordinary murder. It was a meticulously engineered operation, blending manipulation, technology, and cold-blooded calculation. When the trial finally commenced, the evidence was laid bare. Testimonies, forensic reconstructions, and digital timelines illustrated the step-by-step orchestration of the murders. The prosecution emphasized the premeditation, purchasing materials, researching methods, planning the timing, executing the murders while the victims slept, attempting financial theft, and the ultimate flight toward Oceanside. The defense countered with questions of feasibility and plausibility, suggesting alternative interpretations of the digital evidence. Yet the scale and specificity of the evidence left little room for doubt. Experts consistently noted that the combination of planning, psychological manipulation, and execution was rare and particularly chilling. In the final days of the trial, attention turned to the courtroom itself. Pierre's demeanor remained calm, but the witnesses' accounts and forensic evidence painted a grim portrait. Friends of the Han family gave emotional testimony about the lives lost. Survivors described the trust they had placed in Henry and Jennie, and how that trust had been exploited. The contrast between the idyllic lives of the victims and the cold calculation of their killer became a central theme. Every narrative element reinforced the inevitability of justice. When Judge Brian Hill delivered the verdict on November 24, 2021, it was unequivocal. Guilty on all counts. The judge declared, "Beyond a shadow of a doubt, there is no question of Pierre Haobsh's guilt." Sentencing followed on April 15, 2022. 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. The courtroom held its breath as the sentence was read. But even as justice was administered, grief remained. Henry, Jennie, and Emily were gone. The man responsible remained alive. For those who loved the Hans, the world was forever altered. Yet the story doesn't end with the verdict. Even as Pierre sits behind bars, questions linger. How could someone so seemingly charming, so intelligent, so integrated into a family's life, orchestrate such a horrific act and initially evade suspicion? Could any warning signs have prevented this? Was the manipulation purely financial, or was it something deeper, darker? A psychological compulsion to dominate and destroy? And perhaps most chillingly, if Pierre had the audacity to commit this crime once, what stops him from harboring fantasies or plans that are yet unknown? As the Han family story continues to reverberate through social media, forums, and true crime discussions, the unresolved tension remains. The perfect plan was executed, the family destroyed, the killer convicted, but human curiosity cannot let the story rest. In the quiet spaces of the mind, the question echoes. In a world where trust can be weaponized so lethally, how well do we really know the people we allow into our lives? And more importantly, could the next unsuspecting family be just one miscalculated trust away from tragedy? What would you do if someone entered your life with charm, ambition, and an air of innocence, but beneath that they hid a plan so dark it could destroy everything you hold dear?